The following contains spoilers up to Season 5 of The Walking Dead. You have been warned. Greetings, fellow mortals. Horror isn't a genre that I tend to dwell on for long periods of time. It's not like there's anything wrong with a good spooky tale that stirs up a feeling of fear in my soul. Terror simply isn't an emotion that I get from fiction all that often. Jump scares will get me, but that's a sudden change in audio and visuals that forces a fight or flight reaction out of me. For the most part, I tend to evaluate what a scary scene is trying to accomplish rather than feeling scared in the moment, and that's only when the horror story in question is actually scary. While horror isn't my favorite genre, I do enjoy some of the stories that come from it. The Haunting of Hill House is close to a perfect television show. Resident Evil 2 Remake is amazing, and for the longest time, I religiously consumed media revolving around The Walking Dead. I loved the comics, the show, and the Telltale game series. Perhaps I simply got caught up in the hype when I was younger. Looking back, however, that period of The Walking Dead proved to be great. I would say that it deserved the massive amounts of attention that it got. Not to say that it was flawless. I could sit here and point out many problems with the series. Robert Kirkman made questionable choices with more than a few characters and from what he showed in the comics. I didn't exactly need to see the fallout of rape and sexual assault. Sometimes less can be more, Robert. In comparison, the television show had a habit of remaining stagnant for several episodes in a row. The Telltale video game eventually showed how limited the choice-based system of gaming can truly be. Nevertheless, they were fun experiences. There are plenty of things to praise too, though. Robert Kirkman made dozens of memorable, lovable characters. His art was fantastic. He wasn't afraid to kill off characters that weren't necessary for the story anymore. The television show had top-level acting, effects, makeup, and lighting. Even its worst earlier episodes were elevated by the heart being thrown into the show. The Telltale series proved to be extremely well written and captivating on a regular basis. Like all good things, however, The Walking Dead had to reach its conclusion. In July 2019, Robert Kirkman unexpectedly ended the comics. Most readers assumed that the issues would continue for a while, but he created a satisfying ending that wrapped up all of the storylines. On March 2019, Telltale released the final episode of their 4-season game. Like the comic books, it ended in a way that most fans found satisfactory. Meanwhile, The Walking Dead television show is supposed to be ending sometime in November. Personally, I could see them postponing the last few episodes into 2023. Of course, I could be wrong. It's not like AMC has milked The Walking Dead for every ounce of creativity that it could get. There's no way that they're going to keep the franchise locked up. I mean, it's not like Fear the Walking Dead is still ongoing. It's also not like Tales of the Walking Dead is getting established. And it's not like AMC is taking two characters from the main show and giving them a spin-off. That would be insane. Needless to say, The Walking Dead will continue in some way or another for a while. It's too profitable of a franchise for the owners just to let it die. Despite this, the fanbase has greatly diminished over the years. Coming from its height of 17.29 million viewers for the Season 5 premiere, the show has dropped to 2.2 million for its Season 11 premiere. And the rest of the season has dropped in viewership since then. Now, over 2 million is impressive. Lord knows that I can't draw that type of number, but there's no denying that it's also a huge drop. The show has 12.72% of its previous viewers. That's a lot of people that gave up on it. For the most part, that group includes me. I haven't watched The Walking Dead live in years. I gave up after the Season 8 episode, Honor. It was at that point that I realized that they weren't going to shake up the Walking Dead formula. Plus, the main characters were dropping out of the show like flies. Not that I really blame them. Spending close to a decade on one project exclusively is hard, let alone doing it in the Georgia heat every year. Now, you might consider me a bad fan. Maybe you think that I don't deserve to have an opinion on the show. So let me speak to you as part of the 87.28% that fell off the show. If there was one problem with The Walking Dead show, it was the writing. The show stalled as much as possible. The pacing could go from breakneck to crawling. A lack of direction became apparent. Characters were introduced simply to die off. Character development became stagnant for all of the mainstays. You could see the wheels spinning in the mud as though the entire series was stuck. All of the other aspects of the show tried to compensate for the writers trying to mix the lore from the comic books and the original content, which didn't fit well in the story. And in my mind, there is one cause for all of the problems. They didn't have an ending planned out. AMC declared The Walking Dead to be a never-ending show. But the thing about stories is that there needs to be a conclusion. Some writers and critics may say that the journey is more important than the ending, and that's true in real life. In fiction and in storytelling, however, there has to be an ending to contextualize everything that happened. Writing is an art form where the writers can carefully calculate every detail to further enhance the story. Having no ending is just as bad as having no beginning and no journey. A story needs all three aspects in order to be successful. Now, all this isn't to say that the writers need to know every detail of an ending when they're writing something. This is especially true for long-running TV shows. Look at How I Met Your Mother for a good example of writers holding on a bit too tightly to a pre-planned ending. That conclusion did not fit the rest of the show. No matter how much a writer plans a story out, things will change, especially when budgets, timing, directors, and actors are involved. But there needs to be a clear vision of the conclusion. Like with Breaking Bad or Avatar: The Last Airbender, those shows started with a clear idea of how it would end. They were able to build the show around where the characters were going. Then the endings further emphasized the journey. The endings made people appreciate the experience, because without there being a clear finish line, the journey can go all over the place. And The Walking Dead has a great journey. I had a fun time with it even if there were a few missteps. I was still in high school during its first few seasons. I can still remember talking with my friends about the most recent episodes and speculating about what would happen next. It was our favorite show just because of how involved we got with it. We wondered who would die next. We wondered if they would follow the comics or branch out. I never once remembered caring about its flaws at that time. The same could be said for years afterward. When I was in college, in one of my various jobs, or just hanging out with friends, The Walking Dead could work as an icebreaker. People could talk about what happened, their favorite characters, and how much they loved the show. It was a cultural icon. It broke through the zombie and horror genres. Almost everyone I knew watched the show. It was like a ritual. It's kind of funny to think that our modern society would be obsessed with the concept of decaying people in a decaying world focused solely on consuming decaying products. That's a bit of irony right there. Part of me misses those days. I remember when I first started falling off of the series. My friends would keep asking me if I saw the latest episode. I would just say that I was behind. Slowly, fewer people asked me about the show. Eventually, The Walking Dead only came up under nostalgic circumstances. Most conversations that I had about it with my friends involved speculating about when the show should have ended. Yet it still marches on well past its expiration date. In that way, it's become its own namesake. I've watched as a once great show decayed into a shell of its former self. Instead of resting, it's marched into a saw which has torn it apart into many tiny pieces. Each section of the torn apart walker has gained its own life and has moved on in different directions. Instead of us getting a glorious ending that makes us appreciate the entirety of the show, the previous fans will watch as those decayed, torn pieces of their favorite piece of television eventually fade away into nothing. We will watch with sadness as everything that we invested ourselves into becomes a bunch of random events that held no meaning whatsoever. It's hard to say when the show should have just ended. People have pointed to several different instances. Personally, I think that it should have been in season 5. I thought that instead of Beth dying, Rick should have turned the people in the hospital against each other. His group should have walked away as the place burned to the ground behind them. They should have continued their journey while leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. No one should have died after the hospital because the group did what they had to do. When they got to Alexandria, Rick is the last one to enter the town. Holding Judith, he glances back. A look of grim determination spreads across his face. He was going to make this new settlement work whether its current residents liked it or not. He knew that he would kill anyone who threatened his people ever again, and that included the residents of Alexandria. Now, that does cut out the arrival of Negan. I hate that we'd miss Jeffrey Dean Morgan's acting, but I feel it would be the cleanest ending. It would leave a lot of money on the table too, so who am I to criticize the show for continuing? It made a lot of people a lot of money. I just feel as a fan that the show could have ended as a piece of art, that it could have stood up against the greatest shows ever made. It's not like they couldn't do spin-offs or other stories around in that world. I just think that people could have gotten their cake and eaten it too. Because I don't think that ending something is ever a bad thing. You might feel sad that something is stopped, but the show won't go away. Those 5 seasons would live on forever. People would be rewatching them all of the time. That's what a great story does. It brings people back. It continues the conversation long after the tale is over. The sadness of the show ending wouldn't have lasted nearly as long as watching The Walking Dead become its namesake. So what do you think? Should The Walking Dead have ended earlier? Did it spin its wheels for too long? Where should have it ended? Do you think that I'm completely wrong? Leave a comment down below. I really want to hear your perspectives. And thank you so much for watching. If you like my takes on storytelling, please consider subscribing and liking the video. It would really help me out. Also, remember that I'll be self-publishing my novel, Dance of Frozen Death, at the start of 2023. I hope that you will check it out. I appreciate you. Do not despair.